First name's Doni, last name's Glover, in it to win it for the long haul, baby. Today we're going to talk about a topic very near and dear to my heart, as well as to my co-host for the day. Unmute yourself there, Tavis. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Great day to you. How are you?
Man, I'm grateful. God woke
Hey,
us up another day, put us in the land of the living. You heard?
yes, sir. Get our stuff done. Take care of these generations that follow us, and hopefully our energy will offer them some prosperous product.
Black Indians refers to people of mixed African American and Native American heritage,
Hmm.
signifying individuals who have ancestry from both indigenous populations of the Americas and African people, often resulting from intermarriage between enslaved Africans and Native Americans throughout history. Now, Tavis, it says often resulting from intermarriage, and these people are called Afro-Indigenous. But you and I are of the belief that there were Black people here thousands of years ago. There were Africans who made their way to these Americas thousands of years ago, not just over the past 500 years. Black people who have been here.
Yeah, it's not even a belief; it's a knowledge. Something that is a fact. And so when we allow the colonizing systems to define who is who and what is what, we run into these issues where, populations are being used and abused in order to perpetuate the myths and continue the fraud that is the United States.
We had Hannibal Johnson on the show last week. Hannibal's an author out there in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And
Mm.
one of the things we talked about was the Dawes Commission. You remember the Dawes Commission?
Well, I'm actually doing a series this season called The Genocide of the Dark-Skinned Indian. And in the next episode, we're going to be talking about the Dawes Roads a lot. So, yeah, I'm a little bit familiar with this topic.
Now, it's my understanding that as the first Blacks went to Oklahoma from Florida on the
Mm.
Trail of Tears, and these were soldiers, these were not enslaved Africans. These were soldiers who fought alongside Chief John Horse, and I write about them in my book, I Am Black Wall Street. These soldiers and their families went out there to what was then called Indian Territory,
Hmm.
and they were still dealing with whites who were trying to enslave them and also Indians who were trying to enslave them. But they had this commission set up, this Dawes Commission, which essentially said, you're Black and you're Indian. You're Black and you're Indian, just by their physical features. Is that your understanding?
That is the fact of the matter. We had things like the paper bag test and the pencil hair test, things that were literally written into their laws. And so individuals would be able to go and find these tactics that were being used to define who was and who wasn't an Indian. And when you allow the slaver, the colonizer, to identify who is and who isn't, obviously you can find there's going to be a lot of misnomers, a lot of misidentifying, and a lot of abuse on the peoples. However, I also just would like to recognize that those, the soldiers of the Seminoles and other tribes were tribal members too, right? And so they had specific um, uh, rules that they put in place that would deal with a more colored Indian population, such as the Seminole, right? Which is, everybody knows that they were of a darker hue, and the the disparity between the darker Indian and the slave, right? And so, acknowledging that um, the during this time, there were, let's say, 1800s, 1850s, 1860s. It was slavery had ended. There was about 5 million slaves in the United States when slavery ended. However, the total number of colored people that were occupying the lands were in the tens of millions. And so when we take a look at the history of, coloreds, blacks, Negroes, and Indians here in the United States, we have to recognize that those just the disparity was established by the colonizing systems, and that there were multiple colors here that were existing in the United States prior to colonization.
So I want to clarify something with you. There were 5 civilized tribes. And I say 5 civilized tribes were
How about we use
5
a better word?
Yeah.
Let's use the word that they used in law, right? And when they first began, it was the friendly Indians. And so civilized was a term that was an adjective for friendly, right? And because the term civilized is a very dangerous term to use. And one
Because
group,
it's the white people saying, since you get along with us, then we'll call you civilized.
right,
But these cats
friendly,
over here who won't get along with us, they are uncivilized. A way of
savages.
demonizing, just like if you were to go and invade Iraq, you say Saddam Hussein is uncivilized. He's a monster. He's a terrorist.
Same tactics that they
Even though you
continue
over
to
there
use.
stealing his stuff.
Right, exactly. And that's what they did to us, and so, no, please.
Okay, so the 5 friendly tribes were 5 major Native American nations in the Southeast that the United States government referred to by that name in the early federal period: Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Creek, and the Seminole. And let me just add that my understanding of the Seminole is that that wasn't actually a tribe. It was a collection of peoples who were haul-assing up out of Florida.
Well, not only that, the history of the Seminole
Well, they had to fight
is
down there. Some stayed and some jetted.
so the Seminoles actually came out of the Yamasee Confederacy, or the 1715 Yamasee Wars that was in South. And when they lost that fight, a lot of those indigenous populations moved south to get away from that time. Florida was still independent from the colonizing systems. And so a lot of the indigenous populations moved down there, and they became known as Seminole. And so the War of 1715, which was a huge war in the South that devastated both the colonizing systems and the indigenous populations, were really the catalyst for how the colonizing of the Southeast was able to fulfill itself.
So you're talking about the 3 Seminole Wars.
Well, no, those 3 Seminole Wars come after the
Okay.
Yamasee War of 1715.
Okay. Okay. Tell me more. You still with us, Av?
Removal treaties conducted by the United States. The Trail of Tears is the most famous. However, they moved indigenous populations from the East Coast all the way up to the Lenape, all the way down to my tribe. And then, we also have to recognize that these terms that we use to identify tribes, some of them are terms that the colonizing agent made up. For instance, there was no R in any of the indigenous languages of the Eastern Seaboard. And so any tribe that has an R in it is a tribe whose name was established after contact with the colonizing agent. So Cherokee, Creek specifically aren't necessarily the original names of those indigenous populations, but names that was, basically given to them, and they held on to that.
Let me ask you this. I want to go back to the African presence in the Americas. How far has your research taken you back in terms of Black people? I mean, I've shared on this show multiple times what I found about in Brazil, a Black woman, full forehead, named Luzia, Luzia, and her bones date back 12 to 14,000 years. And what I've learned is that this year, scientists who took her original DNA and reconstructed her face have now narrowed her face. So it's still a brown-skinned black woman, but now the nose is getting keener. The forehead is not as round. What is it about these scientists who attempt to, what's the term? Revise history.
Well,
These revisions.
That's only on the surface. And we have to respect and acknowledge that on the surface, the information is really controlled, and a picture is created to allow those that are in power to stay in power. And it really will change the trajectory of the United States as a whole, when the specifically the Black Indian, so-called, recognizes that we have rights that supersede United States rights, and when we step into that, we can actually do what we've been talking about since Marcus Garvey's time, which is establish independent nations and independent governments that would benefit us. And they can't stop it from happening. Why it's not happening yet is because we aren't acknowledging our identity and then utilizing the rights that have been established to start to develop these things. And basically, that's what I've dedicated my my energy to as my whole adult life. And hopefully, next generations will be able to catch on, learn how to establish government, and then really do that. It's like, okay, we talk about it, but how can we actually accomplish that? The reason why the Negro Indian, the Black Indian, most of the indigenous populations and tribes of the eastern seaboard is not taught about, is because those peoples were misclassified and misidentified and are now being labeled as African American, which takes away our individual collective rights. And so now we have to use their systems to advocate for ourselves, and that helps them to stay in power, because as long as we using their systems to try to accomplish our goals, we're not paying attention to redeveloping and reestablishing our systems.
Tavis, how many times have I told you about people who say, they see my video on Black Indians, they say, Doni, why you want to be anything but Black? Why you acknowledging indigenous roots? I'll tell you why. Because one, Skip Gates, the scholar at Harvard, said that he felt that only 2 to 3% of Black people had indigenous roots. And then my thought was, did you interview all of these Black people? Because I've met a lot of Black people who have acknowledged their grandmother, their great-grandmother. Somebody told them that somebody back there in previous generations had Indian blood. My dad told me that my great-grandmother was a Blackfoot Indian.
So, interesting enough, again, it's the surface where they lie to us. But if you do the research, or if you decipher their books, you'll see that they tell you the truth in the books. For instance, in that particular, actually, his first television show, the very first show, was on my auntie. He did the genealogy trace, and it was on the Brown family. I'm a Brown. And he specifically went directly to the only African in our lineage. And now we're, that's that. However, he also will state that between 200 and 400,000 Africans came directly to the United States during the entire history of the slave trade. So the question is, if only 2 to 400,000 Africans came directly to the United States during the entire slave trade, and
at the end, Black people
at the end, 5 million slaves, but only 200 to 400,000 are African. Where the rest of these slaves come from? So in
they were
some
already
ways,
here.
So in some ways, he was speaking truth. Only about 5% of the black population in the United States are African at that time. But also we have to remember this too. They weren't shipping women over here. So any African that came here that procreated with a Native American woman. And so are they African or are they Native American? Now, what I would like to answer your question is that my history, the history that my mother and I have been researching on, takes human existence here in the Americas to about 51,000 years ago. Now, if you look around the rest of the world, there's also something very similar to that time. That's the time that humanity began to migrate out of Central Africa across the globe. What the problem is that they only teach us about the migrations north into Europe, northeast across Asia, and all of that. And then they
The
finally
first
wind.
migration was to Australia, though, wasn't it?
So again, the African, that the human, the migration of humanity, the Homo sapien, out of Central Africa went north, south, east, and west. When they went east, when they moved west from out of Central Africa, they came into the Atlantic Ocean. So
Oh, okay.
now the and when they got there, there's a transatlantic current that takes you from Africa to
Straight into South
South
America.
Carolina in 11 days.
Oh, okay.
In 11 days. Now they know that the Homo sapien could cross water while they were moving eastward and northward, but they state to us that they didn't know how to cross the water when they were moving westward, which would have been this way. However,
Which is BS because, like you said, it was a current, and you just get in the boat, and the boat would
take it there
drift
in
right
11
in there.
days.
So that's why you got 115 million blacks in Brazil.
Because, yes, and actually 10 million Africans were shipped to Brazil. So out of the 12 million Africans that were enslaved, the majority of them went to Brazil, notwithstanding the realities that there were 3 specific points in Americas that date back to 51,000 years ago. One is in Brazil, one is in Chile, and one is in South Carolina. The only Homo sapien around 51,000 years ago were of a Negroid phenotype. And so the original indigenous populations of the eastern seaboards of the United States are melanated. Now, they talk to us about specific bones that they find. They don't talk to us about the bones that they have, that they know. And they specifically aren't interested in speaking to us about the burial mounds and the bones of the eastern seaboards that they have access to, that's going to draw a picture of me and you.
You're talking about the 450 mound pyramids across the United States?
That are identified, right?
That are identified.
There are thousands of mounds on the eastern side of the Mississippi that they just don't talk about. But then there are also things like my family has a home in Georgia, about an hour and a half outside, hour and a half east of Atlanta. Around the corner from us is a Quick Trip. A Quick Trip is a gas station, kind of like a Wawa for the South. That Quick Trip is on top of a mound. They know it's on top of a mound. We don't know what they did with the artifacts that were in the mound, but they're using it as a gas station today. And so, we have the art museum here in Philadelphia on top of a mound. Interesting enough,
You gotta send me a picture.
Yeah, for sure. Washington, D.C., they tell you that it was the map was drawn, right? The grid was drawn by a black man. Yeah, the grid was drawn by a black man. the black man only recreated the grid that was already established by the indigenous populations, and then they built their buildings on top of these spaces. And so things like Meridian Park, if you're from Washington, D.C., Meridian Park is on the Meridian line. If you look, it's also called Malcolm X Park. If you know anything about mounds, that was also a mound if you look at the older images. And so that would
I've been to
mean,
Malcolm X Park.
and if it's on a meridian, right, that means that the science was really high, and they attributed that science to this black man that created the grid for Washington, D.C., which is really
Benjamin
cool.
Banneker.
Which is really cool. However, that was there
He only
before he did that.
replicated what was he only replicated what was already there.
He was on. That's all he did. And so, as a black population here in the Americas, we have to really ask ourselves a few questions. First things first is, why do we feel as if we call ourselves indigenous, then we are negating our African ancestry? Because the white man taught us that. In law, in the Oklahoma case, Miller v. Allen, in which he stated that if you are Negro, then you are a slave. And if you are a slave, then you are African in descent. That thought pattern is what is eventually what came down to one drop of blood meaning you black, right? Or one drop of African blood is all you need and you African. And while I acknowledge my African ancestry, by doing that, I remove my ancestral rights to this land. And I no longer have the opportunity to establish my own set of rules, because if I'm an African, then I'm a migrant. If I'm a migrant, I don't have any rights except for the rights that the state gives me. And so it's a big mind trick, and it's something that we have to talk about in the public and in the open, but be comfortable with acknowledging that at the end of the day, at the end of these conversations, the point is, hopefully before I'm 90, we could start organizing governments the rest of the world would have to respect, the United States would have to respect too.
Do you know anything about the Moors?
I know a lot about the
Moors.
Moors.
Come across the Moors. Tell me about
a whole
the
lot.
Moors.
All right, so a few different things. Moor was a general term for some people, right? Negro, just like Negro is a general term, Moor was really used as a general term for a long time. And so specifically Moroccans, they were the Moors of Morocco, so that you could know the nationality, not just the hue of the individual. However, when we talk about the Moorish empires before they got here, we have to recognize that the adelantados, the repartimento systems, these systems that were used to enslave our populations were systems that the Moorish Empire used on the European. And so the European only reversed the systems and began to use it against Moors, Negroes, coloreds, as time moves forward. And so when you get to the colonizing of the United States, you'll find in the history books some individuals, some populations being called Moors, other populations coming in being called Moors. And then you had the Moors that were navigating the seas on behalf of the European, showing them where to get to where and how to get to where for financial gain and financial benefit. And so we have a Moorish empire that was prior to colonization. We have the Moors of Morocco that were a free people that were in amity with the European and were making a lot of money off of slavery. And then you had normal individuals of melanated hue that were being called Moors simply because Moor meant black, as far as their perceived as far as their perceived skin tone was concerned.
So is it your understanding that the Moors dominated Spain and Portugal for 800 years?
That's a fact.
But you're
And
saying that they also participated in slavery.
that's a fact. Where do the Moors participated in slavery on the European population, which is how they learned how to slave. And then in turn, the Moors were the slavers of Africa. They're the ones that were moving all of these individuals back and forth and working in amity with the European. And so, but again, that was the working class. I mean, not the what do they call it? The high class. The common folk, were Moors because they were colored, and they were being enslaved. And so, just like the term Negro can mean different things, the term Moor means things, and you have to really pay attention to what time, what group of people we're talking about when we talk about the Moors. But yeah, they ruled Europe for 700, 800 years. And then Europe fought back and won their power and chased the Moors out. And as all of those things was happening, you had individuals that were trying to benefit financially and would sell their own people out.
So when the Moors fled Spain and the Iberian Peninsula, and this is around the time of Ferdinand and Isabella, this is around the time of Columbus getting money from the Spanish and the Portuguese to come across these waters. This is also the time, I think, Pedro Nino Alonso, he was Columbus's tour guide. I've learned, and I write about it in this book again, about Juan Garrido. Juan Garrido was, to my knowledge, to my research, the first Black that came to these Americas. He was a soldier. He was not a slave.
Well, we have to recognize that when they say the first, it was the first for them and
for them.
And
for them, and in that era, in that time frame,
well,
because as you said, they've been Blacks here thousands of years ago, right?
And they were trading with each other. It's not like the African of the West Coast and the Native American of the East Coast didn't know that they existed until Columbus got here. It's a known fact that spears and other artifacts, spears, bones, arrowheads, pearls, shark teeth, things of those things were being traded across the oceans, and that one of the ways that they convinced the European that there were lands on the other sides of the water was by presenting them with spears and other feathers and things that they got from over here prior. And say, look, where we get these things from? These things don't exist on these lands. We got them from over there. And so it was one. And so we have commerce that proves that the African and the Native American were trading for thousands of years prior to this colonization period that we're talking about.
I got a question. Look, I got a question for you that I don't think we've ever hit on this topic. Have we ever talked about Califians?
I don't think so.
California being named after Khalifa.
Yes. We've mentioned it a few times. Yes.
Tell them about Khalifa, the naming of California, the Black goddess, and the indigenous peoples. They're black women with long hair all the way down. Tell me about them.
Yeah, well, you know what? I would like to, talk to us about all of the different phenotypes of indigenous populations. But one of the things that we can start off is with, recognizing that humans have been here in Americas for over 50,000 years. During those times, certain environmental things happened to the world, like ice ages. And so, for instance, the last ice age went as far as North Carolina, right? It literally covered with ice. And so during those times, they say that the evidence showed that the human moved from the Northeast, and moved farther south. And that when the ice age began, when the ice began to subside, ice age began to melt and it began to open up the interior of the mainland again. The populations from the Yucatan area, where it was warm, where all of the people went, began to migrate back up. Now, during that time, we had to understand that the plains is uninhabitable. It's uninhabitable because of droughts, because of all kinds of things. And so what you see happening is a U-Cup event occurring with respects to the populations migrating back north. And where you saw people going towards uh, the shorelines of the United States, both east and
where the
west,
water is.
where the water is, where life is. And so now we have a Negroid, population, because again, the last ice age, we're talking about 20,000, 25,000 years ago. And so there's still no so-called white man or Caucasian that is moving around the planet yet. And so there's only still melanated individuals. Now we do have an interconnectiveness with the Yucatan indigenous populations and the Asian, and we can see that in some of the oldest artifacts, which are of the Olmec cultures. And a lot of people talk about the Olmec heads and how they have Negroid features. Well, it's more than just 5 or 10 of those Olmec heads, and some of them actually have Asian features, right? And understanding that Marco Polo was here prior to any other European, which is written with inside of the books because he came over here with the Asian man, right, during the Khan eras, and he came back with a detailed map of the west coast of the Americas, including California, Mexico, and as far as down as to the Panhandle. And so the history of the indigenous populations here in the Americas, and specifically the Negroid indigenous populations here in the Americas, is really just overwritten. And it's so that we don't know that these things happen, so that we don't identify ourselves with this population, and then recognize that on this continent here in the Americas, we are the only people in the world that they know were pyramidal mound builders. All of the mounds in the world, nobody knows who made them. All of the pyramids in the world, those people are gone. We were still building pyramids in the 1700s, 300 years ago. So we just now lost that science. Imagine when we acknowledge and recognize that the only pyramidal mound builders left on this world is us. It changes the framing of not just who we were, but what we could possibly be capable of accomplishing moving forward. No other people in the world can say, my ancestors built those pyramids right there, but we can. And we won't even acknowledge that reality because we don't pay attention to the history here in Americas, because our slavers, our colonizers told us we was African. And so we pay that history attention, which is not a problem.
As I was researching this book, and I'm going to keep on referencing this book, I talk about Kincaid's Cave in the Grand Canyon.
Mm-hmm.
You ever heard of Kincaid's Cave?
I have not. Oh, you mean where they are finding all of the
Egyptian artifacts?
Mm-hmm.
Because out there in Las Vegas, they got the Luxor Hotel. And one has to ask the question, why do they have an Egyptian-themed hotel in the middle of the Arizona desert, the Grand Canyon? Why? The Smithsonian found out about Kincaid's Cave, and they covered it up. They don't want you to know about it.
Yeah, they won't let anybody go down there. But I got even better one. Forget what they won't have give us access to. Let's talk about things that we do have access to. Why is the pyramidal mound complex in Africa the exact replica of the pyramids of Giza, down to the inches and centimeters of the placements of the pyramids, the inner roads, and the artifacts.
The pyramids in Mexico?
Yeah, the La Venta complex specifically, if I'm not
They
mistaken.
have the,
They're
I
they're they're,
mean,
they're aligned 8 degrees northeast, just like the pyramids in Giza. They have 3 distinct pyramids that are the same exact width around an area around. They are exactly the same distance apart from each other, and they both align with the Orion belt. Why are these things interconnected, but we pay attention to the ones that are over there and not the ones that we built, our ancestors built?
because we don't realize that we have roots in South America, Mexico. I mean, when you look at the Mayans, you look at the artwork of the Mayans, they are chocolate.
Interesting
They are,
enough,
huh?
they interesting enough. The again, I just would like to make sure I point this out. South Carolina has the oldest human artifacts remains in North America, before the Olmecs, before the Aztecs, before the Mayans. And as a matter of fact, we know that the first pyramid built in the Yucatan was built the way that the people were building it north of the Yucatan, our people, because we didn't use stone, we used dirt. And the first pyramid that was built in the Yucatan area was built from dirt. What I want to say is that, of course, we know what we know, and that we know as they release this information that these pictures and these images of these populations really look like us. But what we don't know is that the 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 artifacts, the imagery, the pottery, the paintings from North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, the they hide all that from us. And those things are older and they are ours. And so, we talk a lot about the Olmec in the African influence and how that's proof that the black man was here first. I'm talking to you about a civilization that was here thousands of years prior to the Olmec civilization, and which was our civilization here on the eastern side of the Mississippi. And we have the artifacts, we have the DNA, and we have uh, the what's that called when you have the peoples being the population proof that we are those people. And so I'm okay with acknowledging our brothers and sisters south of us, our brothers and sisters across the oceans from us. What I want to say is that what we have to start to acknowledge is what was happening here, and that the reality is that our mountains
I'm
are
glad.
we the
I'm
oldest people in
glad.
the world.
I'm glad you said that. So, how is it that Ancestry.com has no category for Black Indians?
They won't test us. They don't test any. They test no
They gonna say you
native
come from
population.
Mali, you 15% Nigerian. I think they just be rolling dice and picking and you from here.
Well, so
Because
science has
clearly
some.
there's Black people here. How come there's no phenotype for Black Indians at all? None.
Yeah, they won't test it. And who are they? Who they going to test it on at this stage? Because if you test it against the friendly or civilized Indian, we know that y'all removed any melanated group of people from even being able to be a part of that. And so we know that's not 100% accurate test there. We got the proof in the law. You told the rest of the groups of people that they African in descent. And so we don't have anybody to test because as far as the law is concerned, y'all all African. And so science has an issue where they only know what history has taught them to know, and they only will look for what they've been taught to look for. However, if they were to test our DNA against each other, the black populations, they'd find out, well, wait a second, all these people are related, are into, this must be a group of people that were collectively here. There's, because we are all interconnected, our DNA will match up to each
I,
other.
I, I got to get this question in. You mentioned earlier the Yamasee.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about the Mississippians?
Yeah, for sure. So the Mississippi,
because we know about that big old river. I've actually had a chance to be on the Mississippi River, but my research is taking me back like to the 1300s in the United States. Those are questions we don't ask. We don't ask what was going on here back around 1300. It's my understanding that there were entire civilizations that all of a sudden disappeared, actually.
So they say disappeared, right?
So they say.
They moved.
Something had to be going on here.
We moved because when they talk about the colonization of the Americas, we have to recognize that it was the Spanish, and we don't know Spanish history. Black people have no idea what the Spanish man did here in the Americas prior to the British taking over.
However, the British came here late.
The British
Spanish
came here,
and the Portuguese were already in South America and coming north. The Spanish owned Florida until 1831.
Yeah, Florida was the whole eastern seaboard from Massachusetts down to the Panhandle area when the Spanish was here. And so Florida wasn't just Florida wasn't just, that pencil sticking out at the bottom. Florida was everything. Notwithstanding that, when we read the books about the Soto and the rest of these conquistadors doing their slave raids along or in the area of Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, Florida, they state that these population centers were inhabited. And so the mound complexes were emptied as the European came through because we were trying to hide from them. And it's like a bunch of people leaving the city because the city just got ransacked by some soldiers. And so, you know what? We're going to go hide in the woods. Now, the Mississippians, or they call it the Mississippian mound builders, which was a pyramidal mound building community of people that existed in the southeastern portions of the United States that were building mounds up until the 1700s. We have Cahokia Mound Complex. We have Poverty Point, which is the oldest pyramidal mound complex. We have Monk's Mound, which was it's called Monk's Mound because a bunch of monks found it. Right. It's called the Adena. It's called the Adena culture because the name of the man that found the artifacts was Adena. These aren't the real names and real terms for us. These are the terms that the colonizer gave to us in order to categorize us, control the information, and make it seem as if it's removed from who we are. We have the Ocmulgee Mounds in Georgia, right? So many mound complexes, so specifically Cahokia Mounds, right? Which St. Louis is built on right now. Cahokia Mounds were established to follow the 19-year lunar cycle, including the standstill. When I search when the full moon is going to be in June of 2025 so that I can schedule our calendar for our events, I know that I have to give it a day or two because the system that we use isn't completely accurate. However, this mound complex has over 50 mounds built that track the lunar cycle to the point every cycle. Their science is still was higher than our science today. This is the complexity. This is the knowledge skill base, and this is, and again, one more thing. This is the architectural strength of our building because they built their cities on top of our stuff, and it's still there.
So look, Tavis, when you tell people about this history, how many of them out of 10 people, how many of like believe you and how many doubters out of 10?
Well, we had
70% believe you, 50%, 90%.
It depends. If they were educated, particularly if they went to college, then it's going to be 10 to 20% of the people. And the rest of them tell me that I'm a fraud, that I hate my African ancestry, that I'm muddy in the waters, and that I need to go somewhere. Right? If you've been educated by them, you don't really like what I'm saying. If you have a more of an open mind, then they seem to find it maybe 60-40. Recognizing that, I always tell people, go look for yourself, right? Because I don't
take my word for it. Go look up the Yamasee. Go look up the Mississippians.
Right.
Go look up what the real meaning of the Seminoles and how they gathered down in Florida and fought the likes of Andrew Jackson, who said that he wanted to put blacks on a plantation and put the Indians out west in
a reservation.
In Indian territory.
On a reservation.
On a reservation.
It's a plantation reservation. I wonder, how much of the
same
difference.
Thing.
Interesting enough, the Native Americans, right? Of course, they moved all Native Americans west, right, of the Mississippi. They said they shipped over 50,000 Indians. Wait a second. There was only 50,000 Indians? They said that they shipped 50,000 Indians and all the Indians went west. So there was only 50,000 Indians?
Don't even sound right.
So what about everybody that stayed? Well, you become a ward of the state. You were a citizen of the United States, and you're either colored or you're a white person. And that's that. And there's nothing else to be said. And we are No. I was going to say, and we hid it in our life because our grandmothers and our great grandmothers always told us, you Indian boy, never forget. You Indian boy, never forget. You Indian boy. And not discounting any African, but if you over 40 years old, your grandmom and your parents used to be like, we ain't African. We ain't African. And that's what they told us. The white man told us we was African. And this generation and my generation and moving forward, it became acceptable. But before my generation, they knew who they was. But if we said we was Indian, then we had things on the books like the Scalp Act, where they would cut the heads off of Lenape women, children, and men and get anywhere from $75 to $150 per head. Now, my question is, wait a second, how would you know that they were Indian? You cut the head off, how you know they Indian? Because of the color of their skin. Because you cut the head off a white man and you bring it to me, how I know that, how I know, right? How I know this man an Indian, right? There's only one way, if you cut the head off of somebody, there's only one way to tell who that person is. And if the Indian of today look like the Indian of the past, how could they tell? Because I can't tell. I
gotta get this question. I gotta get this question in about the $5 Indian. Mm-hmm. Is this a white guy that paid to get his name on the list of civilized tribes?
Yes, and it's a fact. It's a real thing. And those
$5 Indians
and those descendants are allowed to be classified as Indian today. Not discounting that they probably married somebody of some kind of Indian ancestry somewhere along the line, maybe, right? But not discounting that if your name on that list, whether you purchased it. You know, me and my mom was doing a little bit of research because, again, we're doing the genocide of the Indian. And a part of our research is looking, okay, when they established these civilized tribes, the United States is the one that established the role initially. The tribe didn't have control over the role, the United States did. And when the United States established the rules, I want everybody to go look for themselves. They tell you what the blood quantum of every individual is at the beginning of that role. And for 3 of the 5 civilized tribes, the majority of the tribal members at that first hit was like 135th, 164th, 180, 198th Indian. But they were lighter skinned. And so they were allowed to be registered. Those that were full bred or even quarter bred that had the darker hue weren't allowed to be registered there. And we can look at the record and see that the initial Indian population on these books are more white than Indian, and their books tell us that. They literally state that in their book. Well, this tribe is more white than Indian. However, the United States acknowledged them as Indian. Those are the civilized tribes of today, and it just is what it is.
And they get the money.
They
They're
get all
more
the money.
apt to get the money.
No, there is no, yes, they're more adept to getting the money.
Scam.
What is the United States? Right? It's set up on a debt system. What's a debt system? It's imaginary, right? It's imaginary. So we can print as much money as we want, but we still have homelessness and hunger here in the Americas, in the United States. The country that can print any amount of money that we can, and we still have homelessness. But yet we can come up with $2 billion in 6 months to fight a war.
Look, early voting starts today here in Maryland. Any thoughts on the presidential race? I don't want to mess up your status, your nonprofit status, but
Well,
I can't see you voting for helicopter head.
What I can say is that
Orange man.
for every colored person in the United States, if you hear me, I want to say this: the Ku Klux Klan, the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, said that man is his president. If you are okay with allowing the Ku Klux Klan to pick our next president, then I want you to go over there and become a member. And I bet you won't become a member either. That's it. There is nothing else to be said. The Ku Klux Klan said that's who they want to be president. If you, as a Negroid colored black person in America, are okay with the Ku Klux Klan picking the next leader of our country, then that's on you. I can't rock with you.
Good job. Tavis, how can people get in touch with you? Why don't you take a moment and tell them about your program, how they can get in touch with you, how they can book you for speaking engagements, because you do speaking engagements. They pay you a lot of money. Tell them who you are.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I am Tavis Sanders, also known as Red Tail Hawk. I'm the co-founder, along with my mother, of Indigenous Education. You can find us at indedu.org. You can also find our most recent series called The Genocide of the Dark-Skinned Indian. If you're in Philadelphia, you can catch us at Tuesday at 6:30 a.m. Check our website for time and station. If you're in DC, you can also check us out. Check our website for time and station. And if you're not in those 2 markets, you can find us on YouTube, search Indigenous Education, and you'll be able to see all 9 episodes that we have available to you right now. We also do speak engagements. We do land acknowledgements with various indigenous tribes. And so if you're in DC, we're going to connect with an indigenous tribe in DC and make sure that they come. If you're in Philly, the same. And I just would like to say thank you. We definitely need your support as a nonprofit. Of course, the colonizing agent is not going to be funding these kinds of things. However, we are education based. We have educators in our community for over 35 years that work with our nonprofit. Personally, my family has been teachers for over 4 generations on both sides. And so I'm definitely fully invested in sharing factual based information from a perspective that offers progress and our ability to unite as one collective group to move forward. So, Tavis Sanders, indedu.org. Please check out our television show, Genocide of the Dark-Skinned Indian, and our books, Revealing America's Dark-Skinned Past, Volume 1 and Volume 2, which shares the history of the inhabitants of North America from 50,001 years ago until today. Thank you very much, Donna. I really do appreciate you for allowing me to share. And speaking in engagements, I do need help. They don't fund this, and so we need you to help us. We are a nonprofit, so your donations are tax deductible. We're doing our best to share this information accurately.
Thank you for always coming on, Tavis, and big ups to your moms, man.
Thank you. Next time.
Tomorrow, do your day. Huh?
Now, just was gonna say, I'll make sure she come on next time with you.
Yes, sir. This lady's a big fan of yours, Annette Marie. You know her?
I do. One of my elders in the California area. So, you talk about those Black Indians in California. She works with a lot of the indigenous populations over there in California. And I want to say thank you to all of the natives in California for accepting a more melanated group and allowing us to work in conjunction with you and share our stories. That's what we should all be doing.
Good deal. Up to date, down tomorrow. Do your day and everything will follow. Nothing to it but to do it. I got to do it, regardless of how I feel. I am somebody. I am my brother's keeper. Good morning, world.